Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Vivid Earth. Today, my guest is um, Kenneth Cousins. Now, he's got a very interesting organization that he started many years ago and that I actually became aware of a few years ago. It's called PanTerraVida. It's basically a private society. He actually, 33 years ago, Kenneth and Andrea, Helen met and embarked on a journey of unprecedented proportions. Having weathered many a storm, unrelenting challenges, attacks, vicissitudes of life, all the while forging through the agents and demons of the matrix, like many of us, to bring forth an extraordinary work that is the PanTerraVida Private Society. So through Ken's tireless deep dives into matters of law, monetary systems, history, current world systems, and precise legal procedures, he's created the most comprehensive study course to perfect one's standing as a private living being on the land without attachment or entanglement by the public legal system. And I know all of you are very interested in that topic as well. I think, we all have an innate desire to be free and to be sovereign, and it is a journey and something that I always say it's a spiritual experience. It's not something you can just practically do. You need to truly understand what it means to be free and sovereign. And perhaps, I know that some people don't like using that word. We'll find out from Kenneth what word he likes to use, but I think it's a super
hmm
interesting topic and he's got so much experience. Maybe, Ken, you can tell me sort of in your own words what brought you to this journey today, and how did you come to actually create the society? Because I mean, I've done a little intro here, but it's quite something to create what you have created, and having done that over so many years. And you've also, can I just mention, created the Gemstone University, which is super interesting, which I'd love to sort of touch on as well. Over to you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. Hello to your audience. Couple big questions there. One is, are we seeking sovereignty or something else? We'll come back to that. I'll start with your question, how did I come to all of this? Well, I could easily say, well, I was born. And very soon I started trying to figure out what kind of reality I had been birthed into. I've always been, as you were saying off camera or off recording, that you have a very wide, full spectrum interest in many, many subjects. Well, I've had that since very early age. And so I pursued many subjects, including, in the late 50s, I was already receiving little mimeograph newsletters about UFOs and things like that. So I was a little early on that whole subject. I grew up in Los Angeles, and not far from Los Angeles is this valley called Yucca Valley, where there were people, a man named George Van Tassel, who was one of those real groundbreakers in the 50s about all those subjects. So I started with that. I dove deep into a wide range of spiritual, metaphysical, multidimensional subjects, and proceeded through my teens into my 20s, and in my around 23, 24, fell into the gem and jewelry and precious metals business.
Mm.
Um, so also, I should say that from an early age, 6 and 7 years old, my family traveled internationally, mostly to Mexico. And so that opened me up to enthusiasm, excitement, and a passion for things out of the borders of my native country. So
Mm.
I've traveled extensively throughout the entire world. I've probably been in somewhere between 35 and 40 countries. Through the gem business, I interacted with dozens and dozens of countries, people, ethnicities, races, and so forth. And that just put a very burning passion for travel, the people. Essentially, I set out to make the entire world my home. That was a theme of my life. Certain things happened to me in the 80s. I was very successful in the first part. I had serious losses in the second half that forced me into a certain legal position. that then well, the bottom line is I had to file bankruptcy, and I had managed not to do much, if anything, along the lines of paying taxes, or, well, I filed taxes, but I didn't pay taxes. And after I filed bankruptcy, my accountant said, well, now all those loss carry forwards that you have because of the losses you had, those go away, and now you're going to have to really start paying taxes. And I said, well, I don't think so. I've gotten used to not paying taxes. I don't like the thought of taxes, so I'm going to figure it out. He said, well, I don't recommend that. And I said, well, that's why you're fired, and I'm going to go figure it out on my own. So that was 88, 89, and that led me into the law study. So by 1989, 1990, that was my first steps. I need to know how the tax system works, all of that. So at that time, we didn't have internet. We didn't have what we have today, a plethora of millions of people seeking these answers. There were very few and far between people that I could go talk to and really learn something. But the people I went to talk to were the real pioneers, the grandfathers and the grandmothers of this entire law movement. People who had essentially said the same thing to themselves that I did in 1989. They were even in the 60s and 70s, certainly in the 80s. They said, well, there's something inherently wrong with this system and all the rest of it. And so they were the pioneers. And I was fortunate enough to meet many of them, study with many of them. And so by 1991, 92, I was on that path. And it just fired up my passion to know how this world really works, to know why it's so upside down, inside out, and ass backwards from what I inherently knew. Call it a spiritual knowing or an inner knowing. What I inherently knew, this is not a real reality. This is not the way life is supposed to be. So studying law led me into a much deeper exploration, deep dive into history. And that led me into a deep dive into money, monetary system. Since I had traveled the world in the gem and jewelry and metals business, I had a very good idea of hard assets, real wealth, things that came out of the ground and so forth. And we went through in the late 70s, early 80s, the whole explosion of inflation and interest. For those of you who know or remember the Carter years into the Reagan years. And so I started having a juxtaposition between the real world, hard assets, real wealth, and I had a passion for everything natural. I had studied health since my late teens. And so natural health, natural healing, all of that, the things that come out of the ground and heal us. So I had a pretty wide range between the hard asset world and then the fake monetary world, which I didn't understand yet, and then the natural world relative to health and healing and all of that. And so I basically set out to integrate it all. And the study of law, history, and money was the galvanizing force that integrated it. So that was 1991, 92. And in 92, as you just read from a little bio blurb that we have, I met Andrea, my wife. We just passed our 33-year anniversary of the month that we met in early March.
That's amazing.
And she basically had the same passions that I did. Not in law yet, not in those topics, but pretty much everything else. And we just met, and within a matter of literally days, we just said, I think we're supposed to do this life together and figure this out. So we set out on a path, and it was, as you read, circuitous. It was discombobulated. It was like being a log on a turbulent sea of 80-foot waves. We were jostled and thrown every which way.
You know how diamonds are formed? They're formed under pressure, right?
Heat and pressure, yes. And so, we're not going to go into that history today. I've talked about it in some of my public videos and certainly privately with the PanTerra members. But the long and the short of it is actually in the 90s, we were very serendipitously, or we could say by the guidance of our true being, we found ourselves in many, many, many different extraordinarily bedrock, groundbreaking, global or worldwide events that were current events based on historical events, moving towards future events, having to do with all the things that we now see very readily today. But back there 30 plus years ago, it was not seen, okay? Unless you really looked for it and knew where to look, and then you just were pulling threads. One thread led to the next. So we linked up with many things, including Chinese and Asian elders, Indonesia, Hong Kong, China, Shanghai, the Philippines, Africa, South America, because I had a lot of relationships in the gem and jewelry business that were relationships in these subjects. So basically, I've been integrating all of that for the last 30 plus years with Andrea, and essentially the last 60 plus years since I was young. And I like to refer to myself as a master puzzler. One of the things that I have been afforded with this entire journey is facts and elements and constructions that very, very few people have been exposed to, those who have started in the law movement or the freedom movement of what's out there in the internet. And there's many layers of how this whole system is really put together. And if you do not understand the historical context, if you don't understand the roots of religion and all of that, going back to the Sumerian, Egyptian, Babylonian period, pre-Roman period, and how all of that was integrated, and then moving through the last 2000 plus years, and then the beginning of the creation of the modern monetary system in the last 500 years, it's really, I would say, virtually impossible to truly know how it all fits together, how it integrates both legally, monetarily, but much more important, multidimensionally, spiritually. Who are we really? Why are we here? Why are we embodied in this particular life? What are the karmic entanglements that each of us have in our lives? What does that really mean? Who are we within the context and in the wrapping of that? It's what we call the clothing of the realm. Coming into this world and taking on the dysfunctional ass backwards, upside down, dysfunctional elements that are actually an obverse or a mirroring of our true inner capacity. So karma, or those entanglements that we have in terms of, all of the things that many people on what we would call spiritual paths, what they are, grappling with or moving through. Many people have physical or physiological challenges, personal challenges, family challenges, money challenges, legal challenges. What we do is we look at these as the clothing of the realm. And we, as true creative beings, have the capacity to use what we are interfacing with, not to be the victim of, but be actually the creator of them for the purpose of transmuting and transforming them to emerge as a true and authentic being with vast capacities that both individually, but it has to be collectively. We have to see what we're doing is a transformational, transmutational process of really taking the upside down, ass backwards reality we find ourselves in and utilizing our creator capacity to heal ourselves, to resolve all of that and redirect it into a new creational expression, which we already know what we're here to do. So I use the phrase, we all know the phrase, I'll believe it when I see it. And we all certainly know that when we try to talk to friends or family or acquaintances or whatever, we say, what you're looking at is a false narrative reality. It's not real. It's not what we're here to be creating. There's a new reality emerging. And the first thing they'll say, and you could talk to them for 5 minutes or 5 hours, they will say, okay, yeah, sounds good. Sounds like a conspiracy theory, but I'll believe it when I see it, right?
Exactly.
And then you meet some who will say, I see it, therefore I believe it. Okay. Where I stand on it is I know it, therefore I create it. And when you know who you are and you know within the context of what I've just briefly described, and you know what is actually what we're here to create, and you absolutely stand on that knowing, then the only thing really to do is to continue to create it while healing, while resolving all of the entanglements, and not let anything that will try to counter what you know, both about who you are and where we are, none of it can stop us. The only thing that can stop us is ourselves. And as long as you know it, you will create it. Nothing will stop us. And that's how we approach things.
Absolutely. Well, there's just so many interesting points there. I just got to say, it's quite uncanny how similar our backgrounds are. I was, trained in jewelry design. I worked in the jewelry industry. I studied gemology. I, at some point,
Mm.
got involved in also diamond, a little bit of not diamond buying, but I was some kind of involved in that design,
Brokering,
the commerce of.
brokering. Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
I, I also had an innate interest in health and wellness, natural health and wellness. So it's interesting that there are so many similarities. But yeah, fascinating. Such a wealth of information just right there. Um, uh, I totally agree with you. People first and foremost need to understand who they really are and what their potential and their capacity is. We get beaten down so quickly when we are birthed into this matrix. It's like you have no choice. But I think some of us, I'd like to call it, have the rebel gene. We ask too many questions and we want
Hmm.
answers to them. And a lot of people say, but you're not supposed to ask that. It's like, just that's just the way it is. And actually, no. Why is it like that? And why can't I be free? And why can't I be in charge of my own life? Why do I have to have a government or this or this or this? Um, for lack of a better word, lord over me. And so I never really understood that. And
That's a good word.
I,
That is the word.
yeah, so I think it's all very interesting. So some of us just have that innate interest and so rewarding. And I've also, as I said to you earlier, have such a huge interest in law as well, but I've not been in it nearly as long as you have. But I'm interested in based on the fact that I try to understand how did we get here as well? How come it is like this? The system that we find ourselves in from the fractional banking debt-based system that we are in, uh, religion, the legal system, which really is just, layers that they put on top of what one would consider to be natural law and then common law, and then you can look at cosmic law, you know, the law of the land in versus the land of the sea, the law of the sea. And so I think all those topics are very interesting. And if somebody wants to truly be free and sovereign, whatever word you want to use, but kind of for me that describes it, then you've got to know who you are. And you've got to understand, like, we are the only species on this planet that has to buy land or pay rent. Like if you're an animal, you don't pay rent on the land that you are on. The land is freely shared. Well, perhaps animals, are more competitive in terms of the
Freely shared until the lion comes along and eats you.
exactly. But because we're supposedly a more intelligent species, we should behave better than that. But it seems we haven't, and we've been indoctrinated into that concept of scarcity, uh, fight or flight, survival, competition, which means, today we're unable, for the most part, to work together and to realize that actually united we are so much stronger. There is no scarcity, there's no lack of anything on this planet, and we are the ones that we've been waiting for. No one will come and save us. We have to want to be free. We've got to understand what it takes to be free, and we've got to take full responsibility for our lives and be able to self-govern and live in harmony with one another. So I think those are the aspects that interest me. Maybe we can, dive a little bit more into Pantera, how that whole movement, I want to call it, came about, and
Okay.
what is it in a nutshell?
Okay. Let's put that second in line. And first in line, let's talk about the concept of sovereignty.
Mhm.
So having been in this law movement, we used to, and many still do, call it a sovereignty movement, call it a freedom movement. You know, those are interchangeable words. In the 90s, we all used the word sovereign or sovereignty quite liberally, quite, you know, um, pretty much everything was imbued with that concept. And as I went through my education and my deep dive in the 90s, as I said, I was working with extraordinary beings. The knowledge that they had was quite extraordinary. So in the very beginning of my starting to delve into this, 91, 92, I was working at it in very deep and advanced level. And these were men and women who were going up against the entire system. Of course, the Vatican, of course, City of London, of course, Washington, of course, the banks, and all the rest of that. And everybody wanted to be sovereign. Well, also during that period from the mid 90s into the late 90s, what emerged was something that now is very rife in the internet. It's called secured party creditor process. That has to do with the commercial system, the Uniform Commercial Code, both domestically and internationally. Ultimately, the UCC is, of course, what a surprise, it's controlled by the Vatican. And but we all were trained, and those who, you know, pioneered it came out with it's commerce that we have to master. You know, there were people who were teachers that were they titled their classes Masters in Commerce, and there were secured party creditor processes, and there were very leading edge teachers of that. So I immersed myself in commerce, commercial systems from the early 90s. I mean, it was very soon right away once I started working with this. But by 95 through 98, 99, that was in the forefront. So it was also, you know, it was side by side. I want to be a sovereign. I want to have control through commercial mastery of my, what is commonly called the straw man. And I absolutely mastered that. I pretty much studied it for 10 to 12 years. I did the secured party creditor process 4 complete times, each time much more deep, much deeper, much more expanded, much more comprehensive. And I had some success with it. Some of the people I knew had success with it. But ultimately, everybody started getting slammed by the system. So I started looking at, well, what's really going on here in the commercial arena, the so-called secured party process. By the early 2010s, 10, 11, 12, I started getting inklings of people talking to me about equity, talking about non-commercial processes. Because when you look at, excuse me, when you look at the commercial process, you look at the UCC process and the secured party process, it's all based still on a duality. There's a creditor and a debtor. By definition, the UCC process is about secured interest to a creditor who has attachment or secured interest to collateral held by a debtor. And ultimately, the UCC is the realm or the system for merchants and mariners and their property. So, are you a merchant? Are you a mariner? Do you have property? Is there secured interest? Do you have debtor relationships with that? Is there a polarity or a binary coded construct in which one steps into and says, well, I'm sovereign, I'm free because I'm a secured party creditor against this thing called the straw man, the all capital letters name, the birth certificate, and all of that. But what people don't know, which I learned in the last 15 years and I perfected, is that When you attach yourself, when you think you're the creditor against this thing called the straw man, what's behind the straw man is your actual position as the bonded surety. And the straw man is not a straw man, it is a franchise. What is it a franchise of? Is it a McDonald's franchise or a Burger King franchise? No, it's a US corporation, United States corporation franchise. And everything on the planet, whether South Africa, Namibia, Mexico, Australia, they are all corporate subdivisions of that United States corporation. Through bankruptcy and through the military structure and through the international agreements and the treaties going back 150 years and really going back 300 to 500 years and really going back 3,000 to 5,000 years. It's all deeply layered and structured. And this is what I have studied extensively for really 3 to 5 decades, because I had a lot of the background, 50, 60 years ago. And I started studying the esoteric systems and all those things that you mentioned, numerology, astrology, all of that, metaphysics, since I was under 10 years old. And once you see that everything is hardwired and underwritten by the esoteric system, the bloodlines, secret societies, the religion, all those constructs, all of them are underlying the what appears on the surface, what we see on the public. And so back to the legal construct, if you do the secured party process and you say, I'm the creditor, I've filed a UCC1 financing statement, I've done all this, that, and the other with my birth certificate and so forth, and I know my birth certificate has millions, billions, and trillions somewhere over there in the treasury, and the debtor is the straw man and I've taken control over it, but behind the straw man, you're the bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise. So what does that mean? It means that everything since birth, within a matter of days, when your mother and father, or mother by herself or father by himself in some countries, signs a form called a birth registration. And that birth registration actually is creating a record of vital statistics that goes into the vast global system of actuarial tables and data systems and monetization through legal and monetary and banking functions. And every single thing that's created in that name, that facility, which is both a corporate subdivision, so it's a bankrupt franchise. It is bankrupt because the whole world system was created to be bankrupt, as I'm sure you know. And you were given limited authority or capacity as an authorized representative or an authorized signatory to create commercial paper on the public side and or authorize other financial or institutional entities or whatever to do that in the name of your franchise. And every single time they do that, it's creating public funds, which are monetized debt, which on the private side, there is also created a vast amount of bonds, which are debt instruments that attach to the franchise, that underwrite every single thing. Every time you go to a doctor, every time you go to a utility company to get a service and you pay bills, you sign tax returns, any and all of those things, you're creating public monetized debt, public funds. You are bonding that franchise, that name, into deep levels of debt, way more than what appears on the surface. If you have a $300 fine for a speeding ticket, the bonds that are created are in the millions. If you are convicted...
One speeding ticket?
Yes.
Wow.
If you are convicted of a felony and you go to prison, what's issued is what's called a penal sum bond, PENAL, which is penalty. But it's a sum bond because what happens in the monetary side and the banking side is what's called hypothecation, which is when you take an asset. Like if you go to the bank, you get a mortgage, what they do is creating new funds and they're hypothecating the real value of the home or the property into the future that you will then have to work in the system to debt service and eventually, hopefully, not very often, pay off. Of course, you never pay it off because you have to pay property tax and many other things. But that's called hypothecation, which is projecting value into the future that you're going to monetize today. So every single thing that has ever happened, you can count it in the hundreds and thousands, some people many thousands of events that create a certificated link to the public side through the franchise and the private side to the bonding mechanism that creates more debt. Okay, you are the guarantor of that debt. You are the responsible party to debt service that debt and maintain it. That's called bondage. Okay, they create bonds. That's bondage. It attaches to our life force, our living presence, who we really are, that we have tacitly and implicitly volunteered and agreed to be the bonded surety, the guarantor to everything created on that franchise. So I went through all of that in the 90s and the 2000s. I learned it inside out. I know it chapter and verse. I can repeat everything about it in my sleep. But by the early 2010s, the teens, one day somebody said to me, you know, Ken, as long as you're in commerce, you're still attached to the polarity of debtor and creditor. You're still attached to it. So how can you be free when you're bonded and attached to it? You can't. Okay. So sovereignty is actually a misnomer and a dead end rabbit trail that everybody is chasing. What we really want to be is solvent, which means free of those entanglements by the legal and monetary attachment through the debt system and the bonds that underlie it, as I've just briefly described, and walking out of that entanglement, walking out of the bondage of the matrix that we have actually volunteered to be in. Why have we volunteered? Because we live in a free will universe. Okay. We have sovereign free will. So if we want to use the word sovereign, what we want is the standing in our inner being in sovereign integrity. I'm an integral being, which means whole. Okay. As a whole being with sovereign integrity, I achieve and stand with what I want, who I am, and who I state myself to be in this matrix reality. But within the legal monetary matrix reality, what we want to be is solvent, which means not attached without bonding or guarantor suretyship to that bankrupt franchise with all of those bonds and all of those debts, and to walk out of the matrix and walk into life. And that's what we do in PanTerra.
Yeah, very well summarized. And again, a wealth of information right there. As I understand it as well, the accounting system that they use, basically, it's a double negative, right? So there's off-book and on-book system, accounting system. We only get to see the front of it. We don't see the back of it, right? Which is being hidden to us. And this is very important as well. I think we need to touch on, how this accounting or monetary system was set up, where it originated from, and how come we're still stuck in it today. And about 90% of the population or more is blissfully unaware of how it really works. But maybe just before we get there, you sum up PanTerraVida as a private society, house of peace, society for life, mutual benefit society, private contract association. So what is the essence of what you're trying to create for the people, if you had to sum it up? And I know this can go on for days, but just to
it's gone on for 35 years so far.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can sum that up. So everything that I've learned and perfected and applied to what we're doing has basically looked at the system, the law system, as essentially neutral. We could say, yes, well, the legal system, it's diabolic, it's demonic, it does all these things, but that negates our true being as the true creators of this reality. Okay. So fundamentally, if we go way back, you say, well, where did it start? Well, it started beyond time. This world is essentially what I have called for a long time a creational field. You know, it is it was one time, how as creation works, an unmanifest creational field, a void, a dark matter field or reality expression that had not manifested yet. We could get into deeper and say, well, who created the unmanifested creational fields? Let's not go there today, at least. But a creational field requires beings that are source connected, that come into a creational field and begin to create within that field. And it has unique qualities, principles, expressions, and all the rest of that. And that's who we are, the beings who have the passion for life, passion for creation, passion for equity and balance and all of that. People listening to this call and many other people around the world, we could say we are real beings. We are source-connected beings. We have creator capacity as co-creators who come into a creational field to create a reality. Okay, that reality is created with, just say, expanded layers of creational capacity, creational beings, and so forth. So it is not a patriarchal system with hierarchy and alpha males and alpha gods and all the rest of that. It is a truly balanced and equitable relationship in creation itself. So whatever happened in the eons of time since that inception point, at a certain point, a parasitic consciousness inserted itself into this reality and began to take it over and flip it over into what we have today, into a hierarchical, very imbalanced, patriarchal system that has no honoring or integrity with life or all the principles that we, who are real beings, source-connected beings, take as that's what life is. And so one of you use the phrase cosmic laws, universal laws, or principles within this creational field is sovereign integrity and sovereign free will. That we are absolutely sovereign, free will beings with full integrity of who we are, source-connected beings. And so the legal system, when you unwind it, and you go as deep and wide as I have, what you will see is every single element of what we find today in the matrix, all of the bonding, all the legal attachments, the monetary debt system and everything, it's all voluntary, okay? It's not mandatory. And when you know that we have stepped into it to voluntarily take on the clothing of the realm, in order to do what I said earlier, and that we have the capacity, it's innate, it's inherent, it's hardwired into the legal and monetary system, that when you have accepted a voluntary status, you have the capacity to rescind that status, okay? Remove your assent or consent to that status. And that operates legally, monetarily, cosmically, and everything in between. So rather than seeing ourselves as the victim of this reality, if we see ourselves as the creator, that the parasitic infiltration has created a false reality, and knowing how creator beings, source-connected beings actually create, they set up a very deep multi-layered system to get us to entrain ourselves as creator beings in our creator capacity, to allow ourselves voluntarily to become biocrystalline virtual reality projecting units, to project that false reality into this creational field and progressively millions, billions, and multiple billions of beings who have no clue what the reality is that they live in, accept that for face value. This is our reality. We have to do this. We have to listen to them when they say do this, and then they do, you know, all those things. And there are billions of people, what people like to now call non-playing characters, and you know, zombified hive mind Borg beings, which there are many, who just go along with the program. But when they're in physical bodies, they are still participating in projecting that narrative. But when a true source-connected being wakes up and starts integrating themselves, starts removing the entanglements and the attachments that we accepted and we took on upon ourselves, we start exponentially expanding our standing and our greater capacity, that we have the full capacity to supersede this false narrative, and we can start actually building and creating a new reality in alignment with source, creation, life, and all that is good and wholesome and all the rest of it. And when I studied equity, so equity primarily operates on 20 maxims, 20 statements, as opposed to the legal system that has hundreds of millions of codes and statutes that are binding to the bonded sureties who have volunteered to become the surety against that franchise and its debt quotient and all the rest of it. When we voluntarily walk into that, we have to follow all those millions of codes and statutes. But we created it. We have the capacity to uncreate it. We have the legal and lawful capacity to rescind our signatures on any and all documents. We have the capacity to revoke every power of attorney we ever gave to any public entity or system or office or officer, and revoke that power of attorney, that they do not have power of attorney over our commercial persona. And that will terminate the contracts, because everything is contract. All law is created by contract. So as creator beings, when we take full responsibility for what we created in our life and collectively, we have the capacity to uncreate it. So one of the things that I observed quite extensively in the 90s, all these brilliant people that I mentioned, the one thing that they had more than anything else was what I ended up calling the enemy construct. Everything external was the enemy. The government, the Vatican, the military, the bankers, the
Somebody
money
else is
system,
always
the
to
legal
blame,
system.
right?
It was always, and when you have an enemy construct and you project it outside of yourself, then you are a victim and you will always be controlled and controllable.
You can
And
never be
most,
sovereign as a victim.
yeah,
The two
you will
doesn't
never
go
have
together.
sovereign integrity. You will never reintegrate your sovereign free will to be a creator being and create into the creational field, which is basically a neutral field. If you want to create everything that has been created, war and destruction and violence, and all the rest of it, well, look, that's what we created. If you want to stop creating it, you have to remove your consent and your signatory attachment to that. And signatory includes when we put pen to paper, but it's also who we are. We have a unique signature frequency that is unique in all of creation. And when that signature frequency comes through our arm into a pen, onto a paper, we have bonded ourselves to the obligations of that piece of paper. And we have done it hundreds and thousands of times. So what we want to be is solvent. We need to know how to achieve that. We need to know how to remove all of those attachments and entanglements. And we have to bring it in, because there is no enemy. There is only the opportunity to see the reflection of our own inner separation and our own acceptance of a binary coded false reality that we've been playing in, and we don't have to continue to play in.
That is so well said. I always say to people, you can't be a victim and be sovereign or have sovereign integrity, as you say. And until you take full responsibility for your life, whatever happened, whoever subjected you, you need to make a decision that moving forward, you're going to take full self-responsibility for your own life. And you have to actively not consent to that anymore, because we are creative beings. And quite frankly, the parasitic forces that have been controlling this planet actually use us to create their false construct for them.
Mm-hmm.
So they use our creative powers. They themselves are not actually creative at all. So, we have to be careful, therefore, what we consent to, because whatever we consent to, even if it's not objecting to it in a way that's consent as well, we will be co-creating that. So when people say,
Yeah.
oh, it's too difficult, and, I don't want to rock the boat, and my job, and, my life, and, well, then you mustn't complain, because we all have the opportunity to detach from that. And I always say to people, where there's a will, there is a way. Like, get rid of all your debt. It doesn't matter. Sell everything you have. At least you'll be free. So do you want all this stuff and you want to be a bondage slave, or you want to continue, having all the comforts of life but not be free? So I know it's not all that simple, and that is not the only thing that makes you free. But I think if you understand on a very deep spiritual level what it means to be free and to have that sovereign integrity, that is absolutely where you need to start. For most people interested in this path, it's because they want to get out of debt, or they want to stop paying tax, or this or that, but they don't truly want to find out what it means to be spiritually free and standing on your own 2 feet on the land as a living man or woman, and to be fully self-responsible and unattached to the system. And I know it's difficult, you can be stopped by a traffic officer, whatever. What do you do? And you still have to operate within that matrix. And I guess that's where the difficulty comes in for a lot of people, because they just say it's too risky, it's too difficult. But at least just start somewhere, even if it's not a perfect science yet, you have to start taking the steps towards that end goal. Because if you're not going to do that, you'll never get there. And you'll just keep recreating and reinforcing the false matrix in which we operate. Because basically then you're consenting to that. What are your thoughts on that in terms of,
Well, let me ask you a question that you asked earlier that I said is part two, which is, well, what is PanTerra? How did that come about? What is its history? Where are we at today? What have we achieved so far? Where are we going from here? So, as I described my history in the 1990s into the 2000s and meeting and working with these people that I've mentioned, I met the pioneers of what many people use or attempt to use today, many erroneously or really not according to the law, and they get themselves in trouble. And I've watched that over so many years, decades really. And that includes the people that I called my mentors, who, as I said, they had their own enemy construct, and basically they didn't even understand what I came to understand in what I have termed status, standing, and capacity. And that really started emerging in the early 2010s, when that individual said to me, you're still bonded, you're still attached if you're creditor debtor in this commercial realm. And that started opening up equity and what is equity really. And so a few of those people that I worked with in the 90s opened up and pioneered things about private contract trusts, pure trust organizations, unincorporated business organizations, things that nobody knew about except for a very few. I actually met and worked with the man who opened that up initially in the 80s and the 90s, and he taught me virtually everything he knew. And ironically, he ended up getting caught for tax evasion. He was using the pure trust organization or private contract trust, and that's what I learned from him. And he was using it for numerous different functions. Ultimately, I came to know he didn't really know what he needed to know, and he got caught. The one of the leading experts in secured party creditor got sentenced to 17 years in prison for using that system. Okay. Another one of the leaders of all of that using secured party and related stuff. I don't know how much time he got, but it was somewhere 8 or 10 years. So I watched all the, and then another guy that I worked with, 1997, 98, he got sent to prison for 12 years. So I watched these guys get sent to prison for one, because they had the enemy construct. For two, they didn't understand the real nature of commerce, and they didn't understand even these entities, the pure trust or corporation soul, and so forth, and how to structure it properly in what I call a multi-layered, multiple layers, multi-jurisdictional structure. Because if you use a single entity, a trust, or a single entity, a corporation soul, or whatever, you will, the system is set up, you will never be able to function within the matrix. You'll never be able to be in the matrix without, in the matrix without, what's the word, in the world without in it, but not of it. Okay, that's what it is.
Mm.
The whole goal here is we're in the matrix. We have to utilize the matrix and its systems in order to buy and sell, to have a home, whatever, whether you own it, quote unquote, or rent it, whatever. But how do you be in the matrix without being of it? Being of it means your being, your life force is attached to it, that is continually destructing life and creating debt and all the rest of it. The secret is one, multi-layering, so that you understand how to structure a multi-layered strategy of how to be in it but not of it. Well, I was learning that and coming to understand that when we first created Pantera in February 2002. And again, I worked with several of the masters who knew how to do that. But it took me 12 to 14 years to actually know what it was. Fortunately, in those 12 years between '02 and 2014-15, I stayed enough in the background. I didn't chase rainbows, because a lot of these people, they would learn something and they go, oh, I could do this. I could create this instrument. I could go to the car dealer and I can buy a car. I can buy 5 cars. I can do this and that.
Bills of
And they
exchange.
always, they, hmm?
Bills of exchange, right?
Yeah, and they all went to prison for that. Okay, so we didn't chase that. That's in the beginning when you read that thing about Andrea and I, what we did, and all the vicissitudes, and being on the, turbulent seas and being slammed around and everything. A lot of that was because we lived on the edge and we did not jump into that. We were extremely, what you would call poor. We were lacking in financial capacity because I didn't chase those rainbows and I didn't jump in and say, we could get a new car by doing this commercial process. And so we stayed back and we watched that. And that's kept us safe, and that kept me out of prison. And then once I started learning how to really protect myself, and what I started learning what a society really is, because Pantera is created as a society and an office called generically a corporation soul. I didn't know what that was for 13 years. It took me till 2014, 15, 16 to actually know what it was and go deeper in the research and find out what is a society within the world system. Well, every government on the planet is fundamentally set up as a society. Every religion or church is set up as a society. Every nonprofit, NGO, nonprofit tax-exempt entity is fundamentally a society. But they all have been given that quote unquote authority to exist as a society by some jurisdiction that's a domestic jurisdiction that's attached to the matrix bondage system. And if you don't follow the rules, they will come and slam you. And so what I figured out is a private society that does not get its authority to be and exist and function the way it wants, if it doesn't have those legal bonds and attachments, can be everything that the public side can be. It can be its own jurisdiction, essentially its own government or its own governing body and principles. It can have its own court. It can have its own law form. It can have its own treasury and monetary issue if it has the means to do that. So we have built that over the last 20 years. Concurrent with that, as I perfected my knowledge, both integrating what I did in the commercial realm, going into equity, going into non-polarized reality, learning what equity really means in terms of trust law, estates, and things like that, and how to integrate all of it and also integrate it with the esoteric and the spiritual grounding and the inner work that Andrea and I have done our whole lives, that out of that, over a 30-year progression or evolution, we have integrated PanTerra. And originally it was called PanTerra d'Oro, which means gold or golden, the golden panther and like that. And we went through a metamorphosis in the last 5, 6 years and came to about 2.5 years ago that we preferred to rename it as PanTerraVida. Now, PanTerra means basically across or whole, pan, terra, the earth. PanTerra d'Oro was the golden across the world. And in effect, we, with PanTerra d'Oro, went through our own alchemical process. Because alchemy is what? Turning base metal into gold, or spiritually turning the base dross of our dysfunctional, upside down, inside out clothing in the realm karma and entanglements, transmuting that into a bioresonant field that people would call an aura, which is based on the Latin word gold. So transmuting and becoming alchemically more of a purified being. But there's also traps in that. There are so many traps in the language, the symbols, the esoteric meanings of everything. We've all gotten into the spiritual paths, the esoteric paths, the New Age paths, the traditional religion, and we can get to that in a minute. But basically, the whole concept of gold and golden and the aura and the rainbow, there are hidden matrix hooks and traps in all of that as well. So we went through our alchemical process and realized that what we truly are is PanTerraVida. The whole world, the living earth, the soil and substance of life as Vida, the true life force, which is what the entire matrix system, the legal and monetary and bondage system is all about. It's attaching to your life force, your source connection, your genetics in a full expression, not just a double-stranded helix, but who and what genetics really is. Because if you study the biological processes in the Human Genome Project and the jab and what it's all about, it's ultimately all about taking corporate patented control over the genetic genome and saying that we own it as a corporate body. We can control it relative to the legal bondage and the monetizing capacity of that, so that we can ultimately merge it with the AI construct, so that it becomes a perpetual feeding trough, that we, the parasite, can live forever, whatever they consider forever, even though that all parasites will kill the host. So that's not going to be forever for very long. But that's what it's about.
The host always ends up standing up for itself. So that system actually is not, it can never always exist, because at some point the host will stand up and will shake the parasite off.
Will heal itself, because that's the imperative of life. Life will always heal itself, okay? A creational field will ultimately shirk or, detoxify itself from a parasite. So in the healing realm, there's so much focus on parasites and detoxing and cleansing. We have to detox what's been put in the air, the sky, the injections and all the rest of it. But that's a microcosm of the whole macrocosm. As we heal ourselves and we cleanse of the parasite, that's what we're doing on the macro scale. And the host is superseding the parasite at this time. So that's where PanTerra is going. And we have integrated the knowledge of how to create a society, how to be in the matrix but not of it, how to create multi-layered structures to be able to operate in the system without being bonded or attached or parasitically sucked on by that parasite. And that's what our education is. That's what Gemstone University is. That's what we have been teaching for 30 years, and that's what we built Gemstone for the last 12 years. And in the last 12 years, I have really advanced through integrating my knowledge of trust and equity and how to utilize them properly, how to always follow the law in whatever jurisdiction you're in, and having the power that you can operate within a jurisdiction. So when you said earlier, people say, oh, I'm afraid, I lose my job, my this, my that, or they'll come do whatever. Well, first of all, that's a good position to start with. If you don't have that healthy fear of the system and know what it's going to do, if you are uneducated and you do not know how to apply this knowledge, then if you don't know that, then you're going to get in trouble. But if you do know that, then engaging a real comprehensive grounding and integrated educational process with hundreds of people who have already done it, who have walked the path, who are there to support each other and new people coming through. That's what PanTerra is. And that's what PanTerra is uniquely in this whole movement, because that's the other thing that I saw in the last 3 decades. The people that I studied with, the people who had seminars and week-long retreats, we all went to them, and I went to dozens and dozens of them, and I met all the people who were studying, and I met the teachers and everything. But when those events were over, we left and we went back home. Yeah, we kept relationships and we were connected, but by and large, there was no continuity in the support system. And so Andrea and I looked at that and said, well, that's lacking. The knowledge of real law and equity is lacking. The knowledge of sovereign integrity, the enemy construct, all of these things were lacking in that law movement, and they're still lacking in most of the things that are out there today. And there are hundreds, at least, people teaching secured party creditor, commercial so-called remedies, many, many things. But they're lacking in so much, both in terms of the knowledge, the integration, and the environment that we've created as a private society that is a sovereign body politic. And that has been proven. We've road tested it for 20 years. We've had virtually every major agency come after either me or PanTerra. And because one, I did not go into a polarity with them, making them the enemy, but I actually received them in peace. And when you know how to work in the law is your friend. And in fact, these agencies are converted to being not necessarily your friend, but your, cooperating interface between the private and the public. So I've had the IRS, the SEC, the FBI, federal courts, state courts, others come at us, not for a long time. This is like 10 years ago. And because we were walking the path of peace, going to peace, they were not repulsed as an enemy. I literally invited them in. I said, okay, well, let's look at what is your need here? What is my status? What is my capacity? And how to settle and resolve this. And what we did. So we built PanTerra through all the vicissitudes and everything else to be where we're at today.
That is phenomenal. I really think you're like a pioneer in this movement, and you've got 30 years of experience to back it up. And I think that's incredible. And it's true what you say. I mean, you can't fight fire with fire, right? It just doesn't work. So there's always got to be the yin and the yang. You can't, put metal against one another and fight the other party. You've got to find that flow and find out how one can coexist together. And if you give them enough of a cooperative platform and you're doing things according to law in whichever jurisdiction you operate, as you say, well, then what can they say about that? Not much. But I'm really
Right.
interested to find out. I mean, so this is like a what we could call, I guess, it's a virtual society, but is there any sort of physical proof of product? Is that something that you want to or have or want to pursue in terms of creating for lack of a better word, a sovereign state with its own governing body? Is that something that you've looked into? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Um, well, that's a big subject that we really should just wait for the next discussion.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a
But
few more based on all of the
yeah,
information.
yeah, for sure. But the short answer is yes. But the first, before I go into that briefly, I want to also address this thing about going to peace. And people have often said, well, then you're being passive, then you're not dealing with the realities of what's going on in the world. And um, and that's a misconstruction of that phrase. First of all, again, by going through the all of the commercial processes, one of the things that we would always put in our documents in a commercial process, when you do secured party creditor, you do other things like acceptance for value or some of the other things that people do with commercial processes, you do what's called a non-judicial administrative process. And that's something that's hardwired in the UCC. Non-judicial means you're not in a court. Administrative means it's prejudicial, and it's a administrative process because everything we are completely wrapped in an administrative reality. And what does that really mean? It means the United States was put into the corporation, not the original organic union, but the corporation in 1933 was put into both military occupation and Admiralty international bankruptcy. Admiralty controls bankruptcy. Civil code emerges from bankruptcy. Civil code is what is given to a bankrupt sovereign entity to manage its persons and its property. And it goes back to Roman civil law and how Rome basically created what's called the civitas, or the civil body, that did not have the kind of standing that the elite or the landed gentry, if you will, that they had. And that's followed everything for the last 2,000 years. So the United States went into bankruptcy. And so when you're in bankruptcy, whether you're an individual, corporation, or a country or a nation state, you're put into an estate that's administered. It's the administration of an estate. And this is where in equity, you have to understand what the nature of an estate is. I'll get to that in a moment. But basically, they call the president, Trump is now president. They call it the Trump administration because he is a corporate CEO administrating the ongoing bankruptcy of the bankrupt debtor in possession. It's not been liquidated. It's just been in possession since 1933, but it has to follow the rules of the creditor, which is the bankers and all of that. So to administrate an estate is basically a function of estate law, which is in equity, and how that works with, how property and so forth are managed. So in the history of the United States and then the global corporate structure, everything was moved to place the global estate into bankruptcy. And that's basically where we are at. And so what needs to be understood is that there are two types of estates. There is the public estate, whether it's a nation state bankrupt or an individual franchise bankrupt franchise, and there is the underlying estate. That underlying estate is what I call the ancestral lineal estate. The lineage through our ancestry that comes into this embodiment, and it comes in only one way, which is our genetics. That's what we inherit from our ancestry. That's what, if we are fully embodied or significantly embodied as a true living being and our true authentic self, not the ego, not the persona or the juristic legal person, we have the capacity to embody and direct that genetics or epigenetics into creation itself. That's what the bonding and the legal system is after. By creating the public estate, which is called a decedent estate, which means in law a dying estate. So we're all decedents. We're all dying from the minute we're registered at 3 days old. And we're dying because our life force is being sucked out of us. That's what we need to reclaim. We need to reclaim that underlying estate. We need to know how it works in equity. We need to know how the relationship to a estate administrator or executor is, and what the living beneficiary is, which is us, as opposed to the way the public system works. So all of this has to do with both the legal and the monetary function, the bonding function of the debt-based system, but also who we are as source-connected beings. Because in the sense that it's all voluntary, the whole legal system was constructed to get our voluntary consent. Yes, we consent. We will give you control of our genetics. We will give you control of our life force in return for you keeping us alive. Food, housing, job, whatever. And that's the ultimate destination for everything. So basically, PanTerra is a private estate. We teach people how to create their own society and their own private estate, and how to manage it from a source point in relationship to all of the extensions of that, how to receive what is created by the matrix in the name of the franchise, because we restate it and we put it into a different relationship. And when we were in commerce, when we're doing commercial things, we would always put our documents in our documents, we would put the maxims of commerce. And if you do a search, you'll find many, many places to find what are the maxims of commerce. Well, they're like a workman is worthy of his hire. An affidavit in commerce states the truth. An affidavit unrebutted remains the truth. And we would use all that in administrative processes because we were dealing in the administration of the bankrupt estate of the corporate nation state, United States, and all the corporate subdivisions around the world. Okay. But one of the maxims in commerce that I always thought was and I was taught and we all believed was our tool to victory, was a maxim that stated, he who leaves the field of battle first loses. You familiar with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and of course, when we were studying that, learning that, it was attributed to real battlefields, and that's the law of the flag. You have two flags, but if one flag retreats, leaves the battlefield, they lose. The other flag gets planted on the land and claims the land and controls the land and all of that. So in commerce and administrative process, if we were to send an affidavit to, the IRS or a mortgage company, whatever, and we do the administrative steps according to the UCC, if they did not respond in commerce, silence becomes acquiescence. They leave the field of battle, we win, okay? But when I studied equity, and with the spiritual grounding of our whole process and path and life history, we started to come to understand that, we're still in a battle. We're still in a war. We're still in an engagement that's a polarity between two fighting armies, and essentially the matrix structure from the Vatican to the Pope to the beings above that and everybody in between always will win in a battlefield or in a war, okay? So when you remove yourself from the battlefield by the steps that we have perfected, then and you declare peace and you go to peace, then everything that comes to you from the matrix can be resolved because you have the power of acceptance, you have the power of settlement, you have the power of your standing and capacity, and you have the power of the underlying equity which you claim through that lineal ancestral estate, and they have no power to then monetize you or suck on your life force. Okay. And we do this at full levels of that multidimensional, multi-layered structure, not just creating auxiliary entities like trusts or corporation souls or this, that, or the other, but our true being presence in this reality. We have the power to rescind, revoke, and terminate all contracts across all of time, all of space, every universal creation, every false reality, every false narrative, false universal projection that they have used our creator capacity to create all of these strange abominations. We have the power to rescind our unique signature frequency, and they can no longer create out of our being, essence, and source connection. And that's how you kill the parasite. And you go to peace. Because the minute you don't stand in peace, you are back in the battlefield. And they will always win. And this is what we have proven. This is what we've done over and over. And it's road tested and it's proven. And we're still standing to show that that's the case. And so where Pantera is going is primarily for reasons that I won't go into today, but for the last 5 or 6 years, we pulled in, and I was not in the public hardly at all. I did a few interviews, but I basically pulled in and we stayed very private. We were doing a lot of things that we're required to do. But right now, we have the time is right to step back out. That's why I'm doing interviews again, and you're my first interview.
Wonderful.
And that what we're looking for is those beings with passion and commitment, first and foremost to themselves, to walk this path, to know who they are, to know that they are truly creator beings with sovereign integrity, with the free will capacity to disengage from this false narrative reality and start redirecting their creator capacity into creating the reality that we want to be in. And so that's who we're looking for. And yes, it's a hard path because we're gentle in many respects, but we are also hard taskmasters. We've gone through really 30 years of trying to work with many people, the last 5 to 8 years with quite a number of people. And we have found that most people are not ready to break through or pierce through their own limitations, their own resistance points. Many people were programmed to argue for our limitations. Because see, that's what you basically said. Well, people will say, oh, I need to protect my job, my family, my this, my that. Okay, you're arguing for your limitations. Okay, you don't need to do that because you are a source connected creator being. So you were either pander to their program of lack and limitation based on fear and survival, or you will come to grow into knowing who you really are and know that nothing can stop you, that you're an unstoppable force of creation and you're here to co-create what we are all here to create, which is a reality that honors all of life and all living beings.
Wow, that's so beautifully said. I absolutely second that and support that. And I think that is amazing. You've been on a incredible journey, and in many respects, walk the hard path for many people to come after you. So you cleared that path in many respects. So I have a lot of respect for that, and I think it's incredible. There's so many more different subjects we can dive into that I'd love to dive into, but I don't want to turn this into a 5-hour
A marathon,
show.
yeah.
We want to make it
Well,
digestible for people so that they
yeah,
can.
well, I think we've covered what we wanted to for our first discussion.
Yeah, I would love to at a later stage dive into other subjects. Um, so what do you want people to know right now? What is kind of the call to action? What do you want to leave people with to ponder
Mhm.
about?
Well, several things. because we are the creators, but we have been entrained as the biocrystalline virtual reality projecting units, that we have been projecting the movie of the parasite to basically build our own prison in eternal bondage, not only for ourselves, but all of our posterity for all of time to come, that there are enough beings on this in this world, whatever it is. You know, it's a ball, it's a pancake, it's a bowl, it's a crater, it's, you know, whatever. It's all the above. But as we rescind, revoke, and terminate all contracts at all levels, and we withdraw our consent, and we establish on the public record our removal of the presumption of consent. Because when you go into their system, paying your utility bills, paying your taxes, going to court, whatever it is, there is an underlying presumption of consent. You show up, they read your name, you respond. That is consent, okay? I mean, I'm sure you've heard more detail
You've
about that,
agreed to
but
the
that's,
offer to contract, right?
yeah, exactly. So when we remove that presumption of consent and we legally, monetarily, energetically, multidimensionally disconnect from it, we are no longer biocrystalline virtual reality projecting units projecting their false narrative into a manifest reality. So one by one and exponentially over the last 100 years, more and more beings did that in their lifetime. Many who have already passed away, many who are in their late years, in their 70s and 80s, and many coming up who are seeking the truth, seeking to really know the truth of the reality that we're in. And there's a lot more that we can discuss about the reality that we're in. But the path that we have walked of understanding the law, understanding the bondage and the monetary entanglements, all that, and the karmic and otherwise, the path is about knowing that we did it with purpose and intent, and that we did direct it by our will, and that we have the capacity to regenerate and strengthen our will to be the directive principle going forward to direct that will, that creational capacity into a new reality. In order to do that, we must have the knowledge. We must understand. If you don't know who you are or where you are, you're not going to get to where you're going. It's as simple as that. You know, I used to use I haven't said this in a long time, but I'll say it. You know, I'm in California, grew up in Los Angeles. There's piers along the coast, and the most well-known name is Santa Monica. And if you're standing on the Santa Monica Pier facing west to the Pacific Ocean and you want to go to New York and you start walking straight ahead and you think you're walking the right direction, all you're going to do is take a long walk off of a short pier, end up in the breakers, slamming you into the pylons with the barnacles, and you will be ripped to shreds. If you don't know where you are and you don't know who you are, you will never get to where you want to be. So this is what we created, Pantera and Gemstone University, and everything that we do is to teach people who you really are. You already know in essence, but there's a lot of detail yet to be unveiled, and to know where you're standing and know why you can't get to where you want to be from where you are now, and have the knowledge of where, how you can get to where you want to be. And I would sum it up in saying where we want to be is we want to be a fully embodied, true and authentic self being in this body with the living capacity to create as a co-creator, cooperating with the creational field, with the feminine principle, which is the life force, which is the regenerative principle. The masculine principle is the directive, that's the will. We have been trained by social programming, educational programming, and most especially religious programming, not to have a will. You know, it's hardwired. It's my will that thy will be done. Well, you're going to find out whose will you have been giving your creator capacity to, and it ain't who you think it is. So it's a matter of re-strengthening our will, grounding ourselves in our regenerative capacity to hold a field from which we create, and we stand together to co-create. And so, as far as I'm concerned, education is fundamental. It's the absolute foundation, and that's what we've built. So where would I like to see people go in this new outreach that we're doing to invite new members to join us? You can go to Freedom Absolute, because freedom is one thing. You know, you can be legally free and still be enslaved. But freedom absolute is the state of being where you have no attachments, entanglements, or bonds that undermine your true sovereign free will and your sovereign integrity. That's what I would rather hear people say than say, I want to be a sovereign. Just freedom absolute, standing in sovereign integrity, regenerating or reactivating or strengthening my directive principle as will, standing and grounding in this creational field, which is the feminine principle of life, and remembering how to create again. So Freedom Absolute is our new YouTube and Rumble channel. It's connected to Patreon and Substack so that we have people subscribing now. When somebody subscribes to one or the other, and it's a paid subscription, and there's a reason why it's paid now, because we, for 5 years, said there's no monetary payment, but we found that people actually abused the privilege, and they had no skin in the game, and they came with other agendas.
They get it for free, right?
Yes, because we're still hardwired to the monetary side. Very few people are free enough, because what we did is we set it up, become a member of Pantera. The price of admission is your being, your passion, your commitment, your excellence, and your brilliance. And do you know how few people that came in under those terms actually paid the price? Very few.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we'll go back to the money part. So it's a paid subscription. Yeah. So go to freedomabsolute.substack.com or go to Patreon. I don't know. I think it's just Freedom Absolute.
I'll leave the links below.
Yeah,
in the show notes.
Please do that. Or you could go to gem.university and look for the application and all the instructions to apply to be a member. Because once you're a paid subscriber, you not only get the Substack private side or the Patreon, you get immediate, well, it's not immediate, you take a couple of very simple steps and you become a member with access to gem.university. And we have a plethora of education in all these subjects. And you start basically integrating what we're really doing and how that can be something that you can do, co-creating with us with a lot of guidance and support so that we can build this together. Because the ultimate extension of this or expression is we have had as much as 40 to 45 countries with members in it. I think that's reduced now, but it's probably about 30. We're in the 5 major Commonwealth countries, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the UK, and South Africa, with this little appendage called Namibia. We have some good members in Namibia. And we are transposing the status correction process from the US system into the Commonwealth system. We're about 75–80% done with that. It's a massive task that took us 5 to 7 years, but we've perfected that so that now we have people in South Africa and the other countries who have come together as their own society because it's a decentralized model. It's not hierarchical, even though we do direct from the center. Hang on. But we're building on the principle of sovereign integrity. But we're also building on the principle of whole systems and interdependent systems so that we remain and retain a unified field. And we had to go through a lot of that where people constantly wanted to, oh no, we don't want to follow you, we're just going to take it and run. But we have the model and the blueprint. And I can absolutely say nobody has the model and the blueprint that Pantera has. It covers it all. And we're building a new model for society in a decentralized, self-directed, self-governing manner where people come together. And we've created our law form. We've created our court articles and model, which you can find at ptvcourt.org. And so you can go to either ptvcourt.org, gem.university, PanTerraVida.org. You'll find many, many things there. And so that's where somebody can start. And we invite you then to join us, become a subscriber, and start learning what really you need to learn.
Incredible. So such a wealth of information. I think anyone will be so lucky to be part of this family. And I think, we're doing it for everyone that follows in our footsteps, the generations to come.
Yeah.
And it's like the 100 monkey effect in a way as well. Once enough people does it, it just kind of permeates into the general collective consciousness. And so,
well, the more we pull our energy out of the matrix, it's like a big building, like, twin towers where explosions went off and the support structure was no longer there. The integrity of holding it together wasn't there. And for a moment, it's still standing as if it's still an integral building, but then it collapses on its footprint, And that's really what the matrix is. It doesn't exist. It's a false narrative reality. And we have been sustaining it by the allowance of consent to attach to our source connection and our creator capacity. Withdraw that, redirect it, and the matrix just will implode on its own lack of integrity, and we will start building a new integral expression of our creation.
Yeah, a parallel society. Once we withdraw our energy from the matrix, it's going to self-implode. And we have that responsibility to do it, not just to trust that there will be people doing it for us, because that's just, falling back into a victim mentality. So such important work, incredible, and so timeous right now to be diving into this information. So I encourage everyone to dive down the rabbit hole, have the discipline and the work ethic and the tenacity to walk that journey and to truly understand what it takes for you to be free and have that sovereign integrity. So beautifully said. And I really look forward to jumping into or diving into other subjects as well, because it's such a wide topic and so fascinating. But I think, that's kind of a digestible portion that we've delivered tonight. And I hope people enjoyed that.
The first of a 12-course meal. So that was the appetizer.
I like that. You must give it time to digest before the next course.
Yep, for sure. Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it very much and look forward to our next talk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. I hope you guys enjoyed that. So all of the links we mentioned will be left in the video description, the show notes. So go and check it out, learn more. And I hope many of you will dive down that rabbit hole with me. And last but not least, make sure that you are subscribed and you like and share this information, because this kind of truth needs to be shared, and it's been explained in such a beautiful, concise way that I think a lot of people will be able to digest that information and be hungry for more. So the truth is a wonderful journey. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.